Live to the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. He is speaking live in Sydney. He is just waiting for some journalists to get their act together there, but this is all about the East Coast energy crisis we've seen. We've avoided a deep crisis. We've avoided blackouts and load shedding on the East Coast, but the problems aren't over. Let's listen in.
Our energy system in the East Coast has been under very significant pressure in recent weeks. As I said at the outset of this challenge, Australians could take comfort in some key points. Firstly, that the federal and state governments across the national energy market were working very closely together to ensure that the lights stayed on. Secondly, that we have world-class energy market operators and energy regulators, ensuring that the consumers' interests were put first. And as a result of all those things, we have been able to avoid blackouts and load shedding over recent weeks, despite very considerable challenges. The actions taken by AEMO last week were very significant and very necessary, and as I said at the time, had my full support. I also said that they would stay in place for not a day longer or a day shorter than the Chief Executive of AEMO judged as necessary. The Chief Executive of AEMO, Daniel Westerman, will make further announcements this morning, but I do want to say again that Australian people can have confidence in their regulators, confidence in their market operator, who works very closely with state and territory and the federal government to ensure that consumers' best interests are protected and that our energy system remains reliable despite the very considerable challenges that have been faced in recent weeks. Daniel will make an announcement as the market operator. I'll then say just a few more brief things, then happy to take your questions, and if it's all right with members of the media, if you have questions about this announcement and AEMO's role, I'll invite you to use those first. If you then have broader political questions about matters of the day, Daniel will step aside and I'll take those. Daniel.
Good morning. I'd like to acknowledge Minister Bowen, who's here today, as well as all state and territory energy ministers who have supported AEMO through a very challenging week. I've spoken with each NEM energy minister this morning. Last week, when AEMO suspended the national electricity market, we put the security of the grid and keeping the lights on above everything else. At that point, the market had become impossible to operate. So we intervened. And because of that intervention, we've been able to operate the system through a tight and challenging couple of days. And we've been working with generators to gradually restore more normal operating conditions. We've asked generators to bid their plant back into the system, as they normally would, and we're seeing this happen more and more. That's giving us greater visibility, both in real time and for the periods ahead. And it's reduced the number of directions that AEMO has needed to give to generators to dispatch their energy. In addition, we've seen nearly 4,000 megawatts of generation return to service since this time last week. And that means the risk of any shortfall has reduced markedly. We know that many generators are working hard and closely with governments to improve the confidence of their fuel supply to ensure that they're able to operate at their desired level of output. Now, I've said that we will not keep this market suspended for a minute longer than is needed, and today I can confirm that we are activating a staged approach to lift the suspension of the national electricity market. The first step will take place at the end of trading day today, and that is 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, when we'll allow the market to set the price again. The second step will happen 24 hours after that, when we will be able to formally lift the market suspension. After taking that first step, I'd expect to see three things. First, the system that we use to schedule generation into the grid at the lowest cost to consumers, the dispatch engine, will be working without failure. Second, that AEMO will be able to reduce the number of directions that we're giving to generators. And third, we'd expect to see a reduction in the forecast shortfalls of energy or low reserves as generators respond to those market signals. We'll monitor the market closely for at least 24 hours, and if we see normal market behaviour again, we'll formally lift the suspension. We know that a well-functioning national electricity market is key to ensuring the lowest cost energy to Australian homes and businesses. And this step-by-step approach minimises the risk of seeing the dysfunctional behaviour that led to the market suspension last week. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions, or rather hand to Minister Bowen.
Thanks, Daniel. We'll take questions in just a moment, but just before I do, obviously what the Chief Executive has outlined today is, I think, a prudent and carefully managed approach to return to more normal market conditions. Risks remain in the system, and I know that AEMO remains very vigilant about what needs to be cared for in the coming days, but the process laid out by AEMO, which, as Mr Westerman said, has been briefed to State and Territory Ministers in the lead-up to today's announcement, is a prudent, carefully managed and staged return with the same prudence that AEMO has shown over recent days. Also, I've spoken this morning to the Australian Energy Regulator, Claire Savage, who will continue her very close activity and monitoring of the behaviour of generators and ensure, again, that consumers' interests are put first. And again, I say the Australian Energy Regulator has the full support of the federal government as we go through this period for any action that she deems necessary to take. Either Daniel or I would be happy to take questions. As I said before, if you could limit your questions to this matter, and then I'll take other questions on the matters of the day afterwards. Daniel, go first.
Well, the Energy Security Board has provided a series of advice on how the Australian energy market does need to evolve to deal with the energy transition. The capacity market is an important part of that and ensures that we do have sufficient dispatchable capacity on hand at any moment in time. That sort of a mechanism will prevent in future these types of things from happening.
Likelihood of having to suspend the market again, such as
Well, we're taking a number of steps operationally and working very closely with generators to make sure that that dysfunctional behaviour doesn't reoccur. We're working closely with generators to make sure that sufficient generation is available at the right time. And in terms of the monitoring of bidding or those types of things, you'd have to talk to the Australian Energy Regulator, who are monitoring that closely.
Mr. Westman's just referred to that behaviour after dysfunction. Have the generators damaged their social market?
Well, I think Mr Westerman was referring to a dysfunctional market, which he's made comments on before, and I've made comments on before. In relation to the generators, I've made clear, AEMO has our full support of the actions they've taken. I've made clear again this morning, the Australian Energy Regulator, through Ms Savage, remains very vigilant to their behaviour. I'm not here to comment on the particular activities of any particular generator, other than to reinforce the federal government's expectation that all generators, and I'm sure I'm joined with all my state and territory colleagues, that generators bid into the market as they're required to do as a matter of law.